Welcome, Bruchim Aba'im. I am Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. This would be Rebbitzin Katrin, your virtual Rebbitzin, and you have found your way to BeitVirtuali's Day Drinking with the Rabbi. And if it's Day Drinking with the Rabbi, you know what we need to do to start off with.
Yeah. So today we try something really what we thought is vile, but it actually turned out to be quite good. It's I don't know what it is in English. I guess it's a schnapps, right?
It's a corn liquor, which
Yeah.
it's really not possible. It's really not.
It's like
Uh,
malt and rye.
yeah, it's not popular in the States. It's an incredibly inexpensive,
Yeah. Last week it was on sale for like $5.
and it is 80 proof. So don't do this while operating heavy machinery or delving too deep into Torah, which means we'll keep it very lighthearted today, because those of you who know me know that that's exactly what I do, is keep it very lighthearted all the time. Remember, there's always a bracha, a blessing that goes with everything that's unique in life. So, and first podcast after the new year,
Amen.
L'chaim,
Okay.
l'chaim. All right. Glad to see everyone back. What do you have for us, for me?
Yeah, I just want to, before we really start, I want to talk about day drinking with the rabbi in general, because our viewers from the Pacific, from the other side of the pond, so to say, were just talking about because it's 6 a.m.
Yes.
They were talking about, isn't it too early to drink alcohol? And so in Germany, there is, especially on Sunday, there's a tradition. It's called champagne breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it means that you basically stay in bed, and maybe your husband or whatnot brings your breakfast with rolls and all the yummy goodnesses, jams, and so on, and you drink champagne with it. And I was wondering if this doesn't exist in the United States.
You know, there are actually champagne brunches, and it's usually on Sunday that you would have that. And it is indeed Sunday as we're filming this. So, you know what? I think that Katrin actually has a good point. There's absolutely no reason that you can't join us for day drinking. Just don't do the double corn, but make yourself a champagne or champagne and orange juice, and
Yeah.
you're all good. Okay.
Yeah, and if
I'm
you
there.
eat rolls with it, and maybe cheese, if you eat cheese, then it's probably not that bad.
No excuses. We're still not sure of the final time of the podcast for live right now. Obviously, most of you are watching this recorded, and we're not sure how much of an audience. I mean, obviously, this is English language, and it's primarily directed, as it is now, to Anglo folks. So maybe we'll do it later, but Sundays are where we're going to be starting adult education. Guess news number one. In October, I hope to have that calendar up next week. It's going to be either 3 or 4 classes, open to, primarily as it is right now, Patreons. So if you're a Patreon, you have automatic access. I don't know if I'll be doing access outside of our Patreon membership, just because we need support to get moving, and there's a lot of preparation that goes into the adult education. It's very high quality, and this is going to be a Carolyn May style walk through the Sephirot, the various manifestations of the eternal in the tree of life, in the Kabbalistic tree of life, but each of them with a practical aspect. What does it actually mean in our lives to emanate the energy of a specific Sephirah? So obviously, just that sentence that I gave is going to make some of you cringe and say, not in a billion years. But this is all about understanding the symbols and the archetypes of our tradition, and then using those to progress in life and to make our lives better and heal our relationships. And so more details on that coming up. Become a Patreon if you're not already one, and if you're interested in that, that will probably be Sunday night our time, so more of an 11, 12 o'clock West Coast time, mid-afternoon East Coast time, for everyone who's watching from the United States. Also, I wanted to give a kitty update. I'm going to say almost very little, because the Rebbitzin and I will start bawling our eyes out if we talk too much. The answer to the update is Kitty, who you can see ears of our cat there. is in really, really bad shape and is probably not long for the world. And we're struggling, and it is what it is. And we talked a little bit about animal souls in podcast number 1. We're just going to let everyone see a little bit of this wonderful animal soul as we go through this podcast. But the news is not good. There's no good news other than the fact that he's wonderful and right now comfortable. And we're grateful. And that's it, because I'm going to lose it if I keep on going. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into it.
Yeah, so I would like to go a little bit back in time.
Okay.
And talk about Yom Kippur.
Oh.
Yeah, we just...
That was fast.
We just, got through with it or whatnot. But I was just, before Yom Kippur, I was watching a video that I guess we will link below. It was a Judaism Basics by Mayim Bialik.
Oh, okay.
Or Dr. Mayim Bialik. And I was just wondering, she made a remark in this video about that the reason that we wear white to the synagogue and don't wear leather and don't eat is that we get an opportunity to feel what it's like to be an angel.
Oh.
And I found this as an academic of Judaism. I found this odd because in Judaism, an angel is a messenger. And so I was wondering if you heard of this ever before, if you where this might come from, because it sounded a little interesting.
Yeah, could probably spend a couple hours talking on this. I won't. I promise. So I will be completely respectful to Dr. Bialik in her comments, and as Katrine pointed out, it sounds like it's a Judaism level 1 or Judaism 101 sort of thing. That's what I'm going to go ahead and call beautiful midrash. And midrash is great. The part of our, not only the beauty of the Jewish tradition, but I would also say part of our duty as Jews is to write our own midrashim. It's a mitzvah according to Judaism to actually write our own Torah. Some people take that very literally, and in their lifetime they have a Torah scroll written and then maybe have it in their family or donate it to a shul at some point. And that happened when I was Rabbi at Kol Shalom, and it was an incredible experience to have a siyum ceremony. But the metaphor of that is that we add to the truth of the universe, and the Torah is the best reflection of the truth of the universe that we could get to, using human language, human thoughts, and trying to describe things that have no linear thought or direction to them, and that's infinity, for want of a better word. And so what we do is we not only try to add to that truth, but we also try to explain Torah itself, and in every generation that changes. There was an amazing midrash. It came from Midrash Tanchuma. So Tanchuma is one of the later midrashim. It's early medieval time, and since the answer to Dr. Bialik's statement is probably going to be in the medieval times and not earlier there, but it was actually for Parashat Vayelech. It's always so much fun not being prepared for these questions, because who knows what's going to pop into my brain. So Vayelech, one of the last books in Deuteronomy, one of the last weekly portions in Deuteronomy. This was right before, this was our portion for Shabbat Shuvah this year. And in Vayelech, this is, Moses going down and saying his final farewells, for want of a better term. But one of the amazing midrashim that comes from this is that part of Moses saying goodbye, he's turned over his duties to Joshua, to Yeshua, his follower, his successor. And as he turns it over, Yeshua begins teaching Torah to everyone. And so Moses begs to be a part of that learning process, and the Eternal says, well, no, you've turned it over. You have to let him do it. And so Moses covers himself in clothing so he can't be seen on who he is, and goes and he listens outside the tent to what Joshua's teaching. And long story short, he ends up inside the tent, and people realize it's Moses, and they want to learn from Moses instead of Joshua. And it eventually comes out that people are asking him to comment on what Joshua's teaching, and Moses says, I don't recognize a single thing that he's saying. And that seems to make no sense whatsoever. It's not 30 generations along. It's the generation that follows Moses, the person who learned directly from Moses. And now he's teaching Torah in a way that doesn't make any sense. And I think that this jumps right into why Midrash is so beautiful. And I think even the image that Dr. Bialik gave is beautiful Midrash, because it is a way that we can have our narrative be more understood in our generation. And what the true meaning, I think, of this Joshua Moses thing is very simple. Moses was the prophet, the leader, the teacher of Torah for the time that we were in the wilderness. And you need to understand Torah in a certain way to survive the proverbial or the literal wilderness. But Joshua was the leader of the conquest, the narrative of the conquest into Canaan. And doesn't Torah need to be interpreted differently in order to support essentially going to war? And so even though it's the same Torah, the interpretation that Joshua would have to get from it in order to be the leader he needed to be would be radically different than Moses. And that's the power of Midrash. We all are going to interpret differently in each generation. So I would say that that's probably not the original reason that we wear white. So two major images of white associated with Yom Kippur. One would be Psalm 51. So Psalm 51 is the Psalm of David, where he is realizing that he messed up with Bathsheba, which he really messed up with Bathsheba. So he committed adultery, and then he had Bathsheba's husband killed, and not so good. And so the text of the psalm is, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and save me from my sin. A little bit later on, one of the primary verses that's used in Christianity for the doctrine of original sin is there, for in sin my mother conceived me. I think that means something very different. So discussion for a different day. And then he says, wash me and I will become whiter than snow. So one of the original images of what happens after we make teshuvah, after we repent, is that we wear white. Another image of that, of course, is the Avodah service in Yom Kippur itself, where we learn also in the Torah that the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, when he went into the temple in order to be able to go into the Holy of Holies after days of purifying himself, that the color of the robe that he wore was white. So we associate white with repentance, and then that's probably the pshat reason, the clear or obvious reason. Now, you mentioned, and you're completely correct, and this is one of those things that I think that we really need to understand. We translate the word malach or malchit as angel, and that's an English word. What it means is messenger, exactly as you said. That's completely correct. And a messenger in the Torah and the Tanakh in general can be something supernatural or something very, very natural. And there's a lot of times that a malach appears and it's clear it's just a human being with a message. There's other times that it's clear that this is a very mystical sort of experience, but there's really no differentiation outside of context. So that's the original idea, but we have given so much to Christianity. Angelology and demonology is one of the things that we stole from Christianity, and this started really around the 11th and 12th centuries, and we see an explosion in Catholicism of study of and thoughts and exploration to the ideas of angels and demons. At the same time, an explosion of women being accused of witchcraft, and it's almost always women being accused. That's discussion for a different day. And then about 60 years after, we see the same explosion in Judaism. So in Christianity, it came first. In Judaism, it came second. And so we actually started really adopting a lot of this relationship as well, of angels as a heavenly being. And of course, the art of this time going then into the Middle Ages was very much of the angels in white evolving into that. So I think that you could combine those two items, because the images of angels are all over in the Yom Kippur liturgy. I did a new setting for Unatana Tokev, and you hear the words right in that. So that's on the channel. Go back and look at it. But we hear Umalachim Yechafezum. So, and the angels tremble or become agitated because it's the day of judgment. And according to the text, God is going to judge the angels as well, which is just crazy theology to think about that. Where do we get those ideas that even the angels are accused by God on the day of judgment? And so anytime that you enter into an image in Jewish tradition into the throne room of God, there are angels present. So different kinds of angels were all glommed together into the category of malachim later on, but the seraphim and the cherubim, and each one has a different role. Listen, I'm not the expert in angels in the world, so I'm going to actually throw that off to, I think, one of the brilliant young scholars on the face of this planet, Dr. Mika Ahuvia, who's actually at the Stump Center at the University of Washington. She's got publications all over. Mika, if you're ever watching this, hi. Seriously, I think one of the great scholars alive today. Just, I would love to do some collaborative stuff with her at some point because she's brilliant. But that's what she's studied. That was her doctoral dissertation, was on angelology in Judaism. And part of the reason, if you're coming from a Reformed tradition, that this might seem, which you're not, but that this might seem really strange, is part of what Reform did to Judaism is wiped out in the end of the 19th century all mention of angels from the liturgy because it was considered non-rational, and this was the Jewish Enlightenment. And so, but that really does affect, you are, however, a German Jew, and Germany kind of embraced a lot of those rationalist sorts of tendencies. And of course, Reform began in Germany, and I would say conservatism also began in Germany. And so all those ideas of getting rid of the supernatural and not focusing on that. But the liturgy itself is just filled with images of heavenly beings, more of the medieval model. So I don't think it's that much of a surprise that someone would catch on to that. I'm thinking in my head of one of my favorite Jewish songs of all time, which is Leonard Cohen of blessed memories, May It Be Your Will. Of course, he has two great Rosh Hashanah songs, Yom Kippur songs. One is Who by Fire, which is the Unatana Tokef, and the other one, If Be Your Will. It's kind of about suicide, possibly, but it seems like it's more about self-judgment. And the last verse is all these people dressed in white, dressed to kill. And if you go through the entire song, that imagery is, are we talking about us, ourselves, angels? And so I think that those images can get very, very mixed. Last little part of this, the kittle that I wore this year is a lot more of a British style talar than the traditional kittle that I used to wear all the time. And the president of the community where I was serving for the high holidays this year saw me come in, and I was wearing it for the first time. And her comment to me was, "Oh, Rabbi, I didn't recognize you. I actually thought you were an angel." Now, that has nothing to do with my merit as a human being. But that image, it's interesting that that seems to be there. So it's brilliant midrash, but I think it calls up so many other interesting parts of our tradition that are, I mean, listen, part of what I do as a rabbi, and part of what I believe BeitVirtuali is, and I think part of what you do as an academic, is we are so used to seeing Judaism as this big, and this big meaning the Judaism that we were either spoon-fed or that we studied, depending on where it was, and we forget really quickly that Judaism is massively bigger. So if we grew up in an Ashkenazi tradition and you've never been to a Sephardic synagogue, then you have no idea how big Judaism. I mean, it's even the order of prayers in the prayer book are different, especially in the Shlosh Regalim and in the pilgrimage festivals. So, and that's just normative Judaism. You start going out to the fringes of what still falls into the playing field of allowed stuff, but maybe it's not every day. Yeah, there are people who, artists in Sfat, for example, that their entire existence is being in a sort of spiritual communication with angels in order to be able to project their art. I talked to one of these people who essentially is making claims that he's talking to an ascended master or an ibur. It's another discussion. So Judaism is weird and big and interesting and sometimes terrifying and scary because we would really like it to be much smaller than it actually is. But Judaism always has something different than what we thought it was if we actually just explored a little bit.
Yeah. So speaking of the white color, what I always find interesting is that, I feel totally silly to, when I lived in Berlin, for instance, when I put on white clothes and then I drive through or like get to the synagogue and drive through the city in white in
the subway.
The train, in
the
subway. And and it's like it's autumn already and it's not nice weather, and I don't know, it's just like Germans don't really like color, and white is definitely, if white is a color is a different story, but so I always feel silly when I put on white, And it's what I find interesting is that wearing white for Yom Kippur is not really a thing. Basically in the Western world, like you don't necessarily see it in the States, you don't see it in Britain, you don't see it in Germany. Usually, like Yom Kippur is the day where, let's say, men, for instance, really dress up in the best black or dark blue suit and a nice shirt, and button-down shirt, and the best leather shoes, and it's exactly what we should not do.
Right.
And so I find it interesting. Like, I don't know, do you have an idea where it's coming from, that people basically just, and it's also orthodoxy,
Sure.
that people just don't do it. They don't dress in white. They don't understand the concept of wearing white.
Yeah. I've thought a lot about this. I think it's a really interesting question. I'll be honest, I think my original answer years ago would have been people just aren't aware of it. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. And again, we're not talking reform.
Right.
It's so some of you, well, many of you aren't aware. Katrina and I lived in the Jewish neighborhood of Leeds, England, where we just came from, and we lived. Well, I mean, you look out the window and you saw the Magen David on the roof of one of the Orthodox synagogues, just literally a block and a half from where we were living. And it was the United Synagogue, so the Central Orthodox sort of thing. And when we walked to our first Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur services, we were the only people in white at all. And certainly when we got to the synagogue, there were, I think, there are 450 people there for Rosh Hashanah. For Yom Kippur is a little bit less, maybe a handful in white, and everyone else dressed.
Yeah.
And I know that in my time in outside of Seattle, that over the course of time, more and more people wore white, and maybe that was me giving them permission. But I think there's a couple things. So I'll just say where I was. It's certainly no secret. I've been in Mannheim, Germany, down in southern Germany for the last 2 weeks for Shabbat Shuvah, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, and I obviously wore white for Yom Kippur. And what many of you don't know, and I guess if my parents are watching, close your ears at this point, the synagogue was attacked for the third time in 3 months, was it? While I was there, it was actually about an hour before I got there, someone shot out a window. So low caliber bullet. It was, on a side door, but the side door that I used. And I was staying about 5 blocks away from the synagogue, so not that far, but I wore white and I felt like I had a gigantic bullseye on me. And I wonder in Europe especially if that isn't the answer to the question, if it's actually the simplest thing in the world. And that is we started feeling unsafe a long time ago. I mean, who's felt safe? And we don't live in a shtetl. We have to, exactly what you said, you're driving in a subway. It's one thing, you go to Israel, of course, essentially everyone's wearing white. Most people are wearing white. It's very seldom you'll see someone not wearing white on Yom Kippur. But you are essentially in a gigantic shtetl. I'm talking about Jerusalem where I lived, but there was, it's kind of a gigantic shtetl in its own way. I love Jerusalem. That's not meant to be an insult in any way. But for most of us who aren't living a half a block from our synagogue with 99% other Jews, you are not safe. And there is a principle in Judaism, and that principle, it actually goes to the question I get all the time, and that is, well, if synagogue services in Reform Synagogue are at 8 o'clock on a Friday evening, and we light our candles beforehand, and then I leave the house, but I'm not supposed to move the candles after I've lit them, and I'm not supposed to blow them out, what do I do? And the answer that you give is, well, you move them. Well, you're not supposed to. Well, yes, but there's always a hierarchy of mitzvot. And within Judaism, the hierarchy of mitzvot, of course, is saving a life. But there's actually another reason, and that's if there's a question of safety, then you err on the side of safety. And so I always put mine in the sink, for example, and that's allowed. And it's the Hanukkah, we see the exact same thing. The actual mitzvah for Hanukkah is to actually have your Chanukia outside on your the doorposts, not of your house, but the gateway as you're actually entering into your property. Where is it safe to do that in Europe? And seriously, who thinks it's going to be safe to do that? You can do it in Israel. I certainly wouldn't do it any place I've ever lived in the United States. Certainly wouldn't have done it in Switzerland. No place I've ever lived in Germany. So that, I think, is part of the answer. Now, maybe it's not conscious, but it's just you've got a target on yourself. So you change it. Now, I think there's a second answer, to it, and it goes to funerals, believe it or not. And that is in Europe especially, although to some extent in the States, I have to do a lot of pastoral counseling when I do a funeral, telling people, hey, you're supposed to cry now. This is about getting emotional. And in Europe, or in European influenced culture, we very much have an anti showing emotion in public sort of idea. Many of us, it's not universal, it is changing as the generations go on, but there's still this stoicism at funerals that's there. And a Jewish funeral is the exact opposite of that. It's supposed to be this breakdown. And so I think that part of this, you wear your best clothing. My white clothing is not my best clothing. My white pants I got on Amazon for $7.99 and they barely fit. My white t-shirts I only wear underneath my white. I never wear a white shirt if I don't have to. And so they're not my best clothes, but they're my white clothes. And it's hard to get all white clothes. And so you put on clothes that are very inexpensive. And my shoes are 20 euro Adidas, not very comfortable, but non-leather. So I'm going to shul on, other than Shabbat, the most important day of the year, and I'm wearing an outfit that was kind of thrifted together. I think that makes Europeans or Anglos feel very uncomfortable, and it feels like to honor this thing, I should be wearing better, which brings me to the final point, and that is there's a lot of people who only go to shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So if it's the only time, and this is, if you're one of them, come on, start coming to shul more often. Or at least watch everything that BeitVirtuali does. But I think that there's this internalized thing that if I'm only going to be going to shul on this day or 2 days a year, I'm certainly not going to show up doing anything other than looking proper. I'll try to be politically correct by saying proper instead of another way. So I think there's multiple reasons. I've never thought of the question before, other than it bothers me a little bit. But after feeling like I was looking over my shoulder, walking to and from shul multiple times in Mannheim this year, yeah, maybe I can have a little bit more compassion for that, for people who are making a choice. If we're doing it because we don't know any better, then let's educate ourselves. White is the traditional color. Not wearing leather is the traditional thing to do. And unless we've got a reason to change tradition, it's worth being in dialogue with it and thinking about that.
So speaking of leather, the in this
so you never want a German saying "speaking of leather."
So in this video that I referred to from Mayim Bialik, there was a comment under it. And I actually thought the question was really interesting. And the person asked, because we have to stay away from leather, the person asked, so what about if I have a leather couch? If I have a leather armchair, do I have to cover it? Do I have to move it? So what's the deal? My initial thought was, I'm in the synagogue anyway all day long, so
well,
who cares?
I think that's my answer as well. Although interesting, in COVID time, I mean, how many people this year once again spent Yom Kippur on your potentially leather couch? We've got a cat who's about to jump up again, so we have no idea what's going to happen to cameras and microphones, so everyone be prepared for craziness about to ensue. There we go. Yes, everyone say hi to L'Shat Rabbi. There's Vasi. And Refuah Shlema Hashta Ba'agala to our dear Chatul. Yeah, I mean, that's a fun question. I would say that the prohibitions on Yom Kippur are skin-deep prohibitions. They're on the surface and then inside from there. So it's, what we don't put into our body. It's, we don't anoint ourselves. We don't, not supposed to put on perfume or anything, which means for some people deodorant. I'm sorry, I break Yom Kippur every year. I put on deodorant because I'm up there singing for hours. I'm sweating. You don't want to get near me if I don't. So I'm going to call that pekuach nefesh, that I'm, putting deodorant out there. But all these things are what we do with our own body. And the space that's around us, I think, is dealt differently, primarily because we should be in synagogue for, the vast majority of that time. So I think it's an interesting question. The probably deeper question on that one is probably ties into some of the things that are in the Torah, which is prohibitions against touching certain materials in general, having certain materials on you. Of course, prohibition against, mixing weaves and that sort of thing. Obviously, you can't touch the skin of a pig, according to Torah and that sort of thing. I would say Yom Kippur falls into a completely different area. At the same point, there's some level of consciousness of what am I doing with my body in general on that day. So from that standpoint, it's an interesting question of consciousness. But my answer rabbinically would be no. If you've got a leather couch, unless if you're reclining on it all day long, eating cheesy fries with bacon bits on them while watching a Yom Kippur service on Zoom, then maybe that leather, if nothing else, will make you think of, maybe there's a different way to interact with this Zoom or YouTube service at the time. That might be worthwhile. Hopefully it was the cheesy fries with bacon bits on Yom Kippur that did it, but maybe it's the leather couch that would do it. Fun question.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that.
Well, okay. So, second.
Exactly. That's a good.
Second part of the podcast. All right.
Yes.
Bossy, you don't get any. All right. Too much talking, not enough l'chaim. Bruch tanayim l'chaim shechol mi'e pevaro l'chaim l'chaim. And for those of you who started watching late, the Rebbitzin already gave you permission to pour yourself a mimosa. So go get your champagne and orange juice. That's right. If you're in the States and you're watching this early in the morning, you can still day drink with the rabbi. It is Sunday that we're doing this after all, and Sunday's mimosa day. So there it is. All right.
Exactly.
What else do we have this week?
I think we the last video that you posted, or the before the last, what is this?
Last video was the composition. Before that was Does Music Matter?
Right.
Or the Melodies Matter?
So we had some nice comments, I think. For the...
Thank you for we've been begging for people to comment. Not only does Moloch, the algorithm, demand comments, but it actually helps us know what to talk about and what you're thinking. And right now, we are at a no growth of BeitVirtuali. We're exactly the same size for a month now on viewers and Patreons and everything. And we need to know what is going to engage you. So, we're not sure, is it the services, the podcast, the videos, waiting for adult education. So the comments are what we really need. So when I saw that there were some just really, I think, well thought out, but also very profound and emotional considerations on the video about Melodies, I was really grateful to see that, and you two know who you are who left those two comments, so thank you.
And no, I lost my thought.
Well, we got the comments.
Yeah, we got the comments, and it was really cool because the video was long, just as
yes, the next two that are released are both under to be released, already recorded. They're both under 10 minutes. So,
but yeah, I think it was a really important topic, and it's always for whatever reason controversial. I think changing the melodies that it's about what you're used to and so on. And it also, for me, it actually also ties into, I'm also sometimes uncomfortable if someone sings a melody that I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
But for instance, I really like the melodies for, I think, Yom Kippur are probably my favorite melodies. And then also for, what's coming up, Sukkot. I really like these marching sounds and so on. So I think it was a really important video that you made about the music, or do the melodies matter? And maybe you can talk about the Sukkot melodies, how they matter.
Well, so, Sukkot brings up three different things that are, obviously there's a lot of different Nusachim, and I think that one of the reasons that until I actually do a lot more study, I would never even try to get a cantorial investiture, because I would say my personal weakness as a rabbi who sings is my knowledge of Nusach for the Shalosh Regalim. But the parts of it that I think are worth mentioning, one is we do chant the Ecclesiastes, the Kohelet scroll, as part of Sukkot, and then that has the same melody as Shir HaShirim and Ruth, which is interesting. So it's the same trope for those three. So part of the question is, well, what binds together Ruth, Shir HaShirim, and then Kohelet, and the answer to that is, well, there are the three pilgrimage festivals. So there is this underlying, and I think it is, well, I mean, music is mystical in its own way. It is profoundly emotional. It's transformative. That's a lot of what the video was about. But, you know, there are moments of music that seem odd in our tradition that have an interpretive magic to them. I think one of the great examples of that is the melody for the bracha for the Megillat Esther is the same melody for blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So how in the world do those relate? And, you know, is there an actual answer to that? Or is that just one of those great things to force our brains to actually work and to engage on what does the shofar have to do with the Esther story? And then it gets even deeper on that one, because the trope for Megillat Esther is half of the trope for the High Holidays. So High Holidays trope reading tours, it sounds like trumpets blowing right there. I hear the shofar. And then Megillat Esther, which is then the first part is High Holidays, the second part is Echa. So Lamentations trope. So you've got the mixture of the trumpet declaring something glorious, the survival of the Jewish people, and then the mourning of destruction because the loss of life that's still associated, as well as, you know, the story of anti-Semitism and the energy of Amalek going through so many traditions. And so you've got these binding melodies all throughout Judaism, and the Shlosh Regelim use a lot of the same melodies. So one of them is the melody that I taught in the video, which is for Yishtabach, for Shochein. So when traditionally the Chazan Hagadol, the primary cantor of a shul, would step up, would be at the Shochein. And, you know, in Shabbat, it's Shochein Maharom Shemo. That this is Ashkenazi tradition, of course. This is Shabbat. I'm going to declare it. It's happy. Everyone have some joy now. Right? That's it. And then for the Shlosh Regelim, we have the I am marching to Jerusalem to make a sacrifice because this is my pilgrimage. And yeah, deliberately. And there's multiple traditions in Ashkenazi tradition, but all of them have a kind of march tradition to it. So that's one of the musical changes that we get. Another is that we have Hallel for the Shlosh Regelim, and all those amazing melodies. Again, you can do different melodies for each of the three pilgrimage festivals, but generally speaking, most chazanim, most rabbis who sing are going to do the same melodies. And so it's the first time in this new year in 5782 that we're going to get to hear all those amazing Malach HaHayam, those amazing melodies. You've got a Min HaMeitzar that is absolutely amazing. I haven't learned it yet, but it's joyful. And you've got From the Depths I Call Unto You, and Katrin's melody is just filled with joy, which
I'm not going to sing.
I was seeing if I could get it there. So, yeah, I mean, part of what's amazing about learning the melodies that are traditionally associated with, I'll try to state it that way, because I think that the questions that came up were very heartfelt, and I don't want anyone to ever feel insulted about what I'm trying to say. I know that this is controversial, but what I was trying to get across is there is a win. There is a win for your soul. There's a win for our relationships with the tradition, by, in the same way that if you take a prayer that only exists on that holiday. So Unatana Tokef, those of you who know me know that I teach on that a lot, because people hate the translation but love the emotion of it. The translation of, you know, on Rosh Hashanah it's written, and on Yom Kippur it's sealed, who's going to live and who's going to die. Not many liberal Jews love that translation or love that idea.
Yeah, I think, but it's the same with Kol Nidre.
Yeah, well, yeah, Kol Nidre is a legal document using as much lawyer language as possible to say, all right, no matter what, you are going to be forgiven from anything you've done. So if you've promised, if you've sworn, if you've made a pact, and it's not poetic, but yet everyone is waiting and swaying because, well, the music that's behind it is what gets people. And for many years, when the Reformed tradition actually got rid of the Kol Nidre prayer, they played the cello composition by, I guess, the Bruch. I'm going to get Bruch or Bloch. It happens when you go on the moment there. Anyway, the cello version of it, and you would see in certain prayer books Kol Nidre played here because the prayer became the melody itself. And some of these melodies we actually refer to as nigunim mi-Sinai, melodies that came from Sinai, which musicologically, not true, but the Kol Nidre melody is 700, 800 years old. And so there are melodies that have had so much resonance for so long, they take on as much, if not more meaning than the prayer, which then goes back to my original point. So if that's the case, and now we have a holiday as important as Sukkot coming out, and we decide to only use Shabbat melodies for the Amidah, for the Shema, aren't we doing ourselves a disservice? In the same way we want to study the prayers and learn more so that we can engage more with them. Wouldn't we want to take that extra time to go to a shiur with someone teaching Sukkot melodies then? So I think that's the way that I would look at that is it's an opportunity. And yeah, listen, I can't sit there right now and give you a really good barchu for the Shlosh Regalim. That's what I do before I lead a Sukkot service is I go and I get myself back into the mentality for it. You know, I've written my own Shema for Erev, which you'll actually hear this Friday on the service. I'll use that for Erev Shabbat, the High Holy Days melody for the Shema. But, you know, this is hard. It's complicated. There's a lot of melodies. But once you master it, there's a joy to it, just like everything else.
Right. And I think it also, I really liked what Tom, our Patreon, commented on the video, and this was like that you can reach like a wider audience with music because music connects communities, connects people, and you create you can have like you can feel the prayer internally and emotionally, and it's not just the words. Sometimes I agree the words are, you know, from today's perspective, a little okay, especially in Germany, in a pretty
post-religious secular.
Post-religious secular, God does not exist society. The word, just reading the word God and God is great or whatnot, is, you know, complicated, and that's why everyone talks about spirituality, because it's a nicer thing, but sort of, and I think this is really boils it down to its core, that the melodies, you know, connect and they touch people. And this is true for the Kol Nidre. You just, if you sing it or if it's played on a musical instrument, but it touches people's hearts, and you can just, you know, a lot of people close their eyes and just try to really soak it in. And so I really liked Tom's comment about it, that because I agree with it, that it brings people together, and it also brings people together who are from different societies and different countries. And, you know, I can come to the States and still, you know, feel at home if I hear certain melody. And but at the same time, I believe it's really important that we have different melodies for different festivals, because, you know, as you say, these, you know, marching sounds for the pilgrimage festivals, you know, also put you in a specific mood.
Well, I think that there's multiple conversations going on, which is what's so complicated about it. So I'm going to use an analogy on how complicated this is. And so I was ordained 10 years ago here in Germany. And exactly 10 years ago, almost. I'm just about to hit my 10-year anniversary.
Right, in November.
Wow. So almost there. We'll have to do something celebratory. We'll get some champagne for that Sunday brunch. So I was ordained here in Germany 10 years ago, and as a student rabbi, but also as a congregational rabbi, I worked with a lot of former Soviet Union Jews, and you know, that's a complicated demographic to work with, for the very simple reason you had 3 generations of living under a system that didn't make it easy for Judaism to exist, and that's putting it incredibly mildly. And so you have a withdrawal from Judaism by state necessity. And withdrawal means you have less knowledge, and what's passed on is every generation much more minimal. It's very linguistic. By the time almost any third generation immigrant group is in a country, with certain very specific exceptions to that one, the mother tongue is almost gone. And I was actually with a group of former Soviet Jews once who were bewailing the loss of their Jewish culture, meaning that their children weren't speaking Russian anymore, which should give us a very interesting, when we criticize groups, to actually have some compassion for just how deep those levels of culture go. But the analogy that I came up with when I was working with various different groups, because I've had a lot of negative reaction to me changing melodies over time. And a lot of the FSU Jews I worked with me and, learn new melodies. But let's say you come out of an Eastern Bloc country and you know that you're Jewish and you learned one melody. You learned Lechadodi and you learned Lechadodi Likrat Kagla Panesha Baneg. So, okay, that melody, right? A lot of people know that melody, and it's done both Sephardic and Ashkenazi shuls, so great. So you know that melody, and that is your knowledge of Judaism, that you do matzot on Passover and that you sing Lechadodi on Friday night, and that's the melody. So you come into my shul, or I come into your shul, and I sing Lechadodi Likakala Yadada Yadada Panesha. I haven't introduced a new melody to you. I have told you that your Judaism is invalid. That's literally what can be heard. Not with everyone, but on a larger scale. If we go to shul 4 or 5 times a year, then when we want to go to shul those times, we want to know what we're doing. And if in between the last time we came, 90% of the melodies are different, we're not going to feel at home anymore. And I think that is, I know I'm making an argument against me for things that I have done in this one, but there are two sides. One is the importance of the individual melodies and how melodies have the power to bring people together. On the other hand, if you've got a few simple melodies and that's all you know, and for whatever reason you don't have the opportunity to learn more or be exposed, the first thing I'd say is, well, it's your responsibility to do that, but that's complicated. And obviously I'm a Jewish professional and my life is about learning Jewish stuff. And if you're working 90,000 hours a week doing something else, then, shame on me for assuming that you have the same time and priorities that I do. But that's the complication right there. When someone sings a different melody than we're comfortable with, especially if we've got a limited range of melodies, it doesn't mean we're a bad person. It means oftentimes that we want someone to tell us that we are authentic. And when someone sings something different, how much more so because of how powerful melodies are. And for me, my Shabbat is this melody, and someone comes in and does a different one, it can feel like it's not Shabbat anymore. And that's the complication. That's what's so hard. And that's why when people hear me do a video like that, it can be taken very much as criticism. Since you mentioned Tom, if you're out there, hey, I'm going to actually just out Tom in his relationship with me, because he is actually what I wish every congregational person was. I've always tried to say, if you have an issue, talk with me. If you talk about it in the parking lot to someone else, that's what tears things apart. And I remember introducing a new melody. I remember exactly what melody it is. And I remember talking about how hard it is to introduce a melody. And Tom came up afterwards and said, and that's a melody that's a challenge for me. Now, he said that only to me. He still tried to learn the melody. He still sang along with it. And when he didn't sing along, he, without causing a fuss, went and read the prayer in the prayer book on his own. How amazing is that? That the one thing that didn't work for him, he then chose to find his own place in it. That's, I think, the next level of complexity, is then what do we do if we're not able to engage in that for whatever reason? I mean, some people just have a hard time learning new melodies. Some people have a hard time even hearing a melody at all. And so it can be very frightening to some people. And here we have a human being who did not like a melody and talked with me about it in a very gentle, instead of that, it was really awful. It was, you know what, that melody was a challenge for me. That's pretty much the words that he used. And then he found his own way through it. That's what I would want, is that communication. Because guess what? There's melodies I used to use that I do not use anymore. I don't think they work at all. And so we're talking multiple worlds. What works on a daily basis? What works for a community? How fast can we do that? What's our personal responsibility for learning new melodies? And all of those are complicated and emotional and should be done gently. And as a rabbi, I've not always done that gently. So.
Yeah, Yeah, but I think it's also important to point out what the influence of the pandemic was in this.
Yeah.
Because I think we we or you didn't really talk about that there was a necessity because of copyright reasons that you had to write a lot of new melodies because we just we couldn't use the melodies online because then you have to pay royalties for it.
Which you should pay royalties, but I'm not in the financial position to pay anyone royalties right now. So
there was like just the pandemic and having online services forced you to write a lot of melodies, and I think I really enjoyed the melodies that you wrote, and it's not about what you like per se. But there are also other issues like legal issues or that something doesn't resonate with a certain group of people. And for instance, in Germany, where you have a lot of Lewandowski, for me it's really tough because it's a lot of times I went to Shabbat services and I felt I participated in a funeral because everything was really like, pathetic, and we, sung out in with a lot of pathos or whatnot. And so, yeah.
Well, once again, music, this conversation, I love this conversation. It can go on forever. That was complicated because I slowly switched out of copyrighted music that we could not get a copyright for. We actually bought a license at my previous synagogue to cover a lot of stuff. Other stuff we couldn't get licensed, and I'm going to do a detailed conversation of why and what and what's covered where. And so I started trying to fill in those gaps. And so there's a couple different issues at play here. One of them is when you compose music, what choices do you make with that? And one of the things that's really complicated when you're dealing with the traditional melodies, when I'm saying traditional melodies, I'm not necessarily talking about a chazan who is dressed all in black with one of those very traditional chazan things up there, who's singing with the Weinen sort of, that's, although there's a place for it, and I've seen chazanim that have done that brilliantly well. But I mean, let me give an example. One of my favorite tunes that I learned in the last year and a half was from someone I recommend that you just listen to everything they do. So Joey Weisberg and the Hadar Ensemble. They're associated with Bnei Jeshurun, one of the amazing musical groups that's there. And when they write music, they write new melodies using traditional modes, either from Ashkenazi or from Sephardic tradition. And so here's one of my favorite melodies that I've learned in a long time. And right as I was leaving England is when I learned it, so I didn't do it much in the synagogue. And it goes like this. Yanai, 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 yanai. So if you recognize this one, they start with Shochein Ad. So remember the Shabbat melody for Shochein Ad? Shochein Ad maharom vekadosh shemo yanai yanai yanai. So see that shape. All right, so you've got yanai, there's the shape, same shape, but now it's expressed in a different way. And then yanai, so it can grow, slight modulation, yanai, Shochein Ad maharom vekadosh shemo. You've got the exact traditional mode, the Nusach coming in there, and the composition takes it into account and then grows with it. And I think that what a lot of composers or chazanim struggle with, who've really engaged in these modes, the Kol Nidres of the world. So, well, Kol Nidre is the best example for it. How many different versions of Kol Nidre have you heard? My Kol Nidre is the Kachko. That's what I sing. If you don't know who that is, then I'll do a recording of it sometime. But I do the Kachko. The Lewandowski setting is what was sung at the synagogue in Mannheim, where I was, in the choral arrangement, and it was beautiful and absolutely amazing. It's using and the other various gestures that we associate with that. But if someone came in and said, Kol Nidre Dindana, that's a Jewish melody.
Yeah.
How incredibly inappropriate. And that's really what the issue is here is it sounds very, very critical. But if someone comes in and sings Avinu Malkeinu with a melody for Baruch She'amar for the weekday, I'm going to say it's wrong at that point. It's wrong because you are associating, if music has the ability to be as powerful as the text, then it should be regarded as sacrosanct as the text, which means changeable because we change our texts in Judaism. But at the same point, we should know what we're changing, why we're changing it, and do it with a great deal of sobriety. And that's really what the issue is. The issue is writing music without any regard of the modes that are there, and then using that over and over again until that's the only melody, and then all of a sudden we've lost that sense. How tragic would it be if in 100 years we forgot Yanai, Yanai, Yanai. Well, remember, Shabbat is our most important holiday. And so why are we so cavalier with Shabbat melodies? I love writing new melodies, but there has to be one arm, my opinion, in tradition, and then another arm in making something that is resonant with a community that does work. And it's not always going to be successful, but I'm going to choose very few songs to sing that fall outside of the Nusach tradition or don't follow the mode or something like that. And I think that it's tradition that we know the modes well enough to know, you know what? Beautiful melody. I'll go ahead and sing that in a concert. Whereas this one I'm going to use when I pray. And maybe that sounds a little elitist. I don't think it has to, because I think that we do get that emotional charge from Kol Nidre. Well, if that's so, then Kal V'chomer, if we really focus on the melody for Friday evening is different than for Friday morning. Perfect example. The Nusach for Friday evening in most of European tradition for the Baruch Hu is Ya na na na, ya na 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 na, Baruch Hu et Adoshem hamevorach. And then, so it's in minor. Okay, for music people out there. Then you get to Shabbat morning and it's Ya na na na, ya na 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 na, Baruch Hu et Adoshem hamevorach leolam va'ed. It's in major, and so you've got the evening's coming in, and it's a time of worry. We're a little afraid of going home historically in Judaism. And then you go to the morning and, but we're here in the daylight. And how emotional is that change? Well, that's the power of music. Why shouldn't we demand that we have a little bit of consciousness about that?
Yeah.
I'm off my soapbox. What was the other comment that we had?
Well, the other comment was from Joe, who also, I think, brought up an important point that especially in, or I guess especially in Reform, or I guess it's not especially in Reform, but because she comes from a Reformed shul, I think she connected it to it, that a lot of people left the ritual. And but they took the music of their grandparents with them, and I think that's also an important point, which is also connected to something that reminds me of a research that I once made about Yemenite Jews, because the women especially were illiterate. And they didn't have anything else but music. So they wrote like songs about, their lifestyle, their fears and their joys and so on. And this is basically what they then also brought to Israel. And this is kind of this oral history that was that were songs, and this is the only way that we could learn from the female perspective of Yemenite Jews, like how they lived their life in Yemen, because this was how it was then also passed down the generations. And this is I mean, from an Ashkenazi standpoint, you would say like the Jews that left Europe and then came to the United States is also the melodies that they took with them. And the melodies had passed on a specific feeling. And if you had a good relationship to your parents, I think this is like also what you want to kind of preserve.
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple truths that are here. We finished with Havdalah in Mannheim. So it was an Orthodox ritual, traditional congregation. It was essentially Orthodox, well, wasn't a, it was Orthodox services for the all of the High Holy Days this year. And Chazan Zelig lights the candles for Havdalah and starts off with yeah nine 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 nine, and we also heard that with one of the Rabbanim in Leeds, changing it slightly but using that melody for for an online during lockdown Havdalah that he had done. And of course, every time I hear it and it's done in Orthodox, I say, I wonder how many people actually know that this melody is written by of blessed memory Debbie Friedman, but a Reform lesbian composer, and it's now the de facto melody for Havdalah around the world. And that's the other side of the equation, because Debbie Friedman wrote a lot of melodies that did not have a relationship with the traditional modes. And very honestly, I use Debbie Friedman sparingly and in certain situations. I think some of her melodies are tremendous. Some are very dated to the time. I think she's worth celebrating in so many different ways. But that point alone, you have someone who, generally speaking, composes music that I would have a hard time finding the place in the traditional liturgy, who has done something so resonant that it changed that moment of celebration. And I think it will be there. That is magical. There's something so amazing about that. And there's a lot of other melodies of hers that sneak in like that, and that's amazing and that's wonderful, and that's really, really good stuff. The other truth that's here is when we are talking about changing music, yes, sometimes the music that we're changing is a family. Sometimes you're changing something that's no different than having someone take your birth certificate from you. And that's the humility. I mean, listen, I'm still young. I'm not even 50 yet. So, I've got a lot left to learn on this one. I feel very strongly about the music, but boy, anytime you change a melody, you are putting at risk that someone is going to come to you and say, I go to synagogue because of that melody. And there are two answers to that. Number one is, we need more reasons than one melody to go to synagogue. And we need to have the strength to be able to say Judaism is bigger than that. And someone saying, you took away the only reason I come to shul. Well, that's an attempt to control me as well, because my job isn't to make sure that I know the one thing that everyone goes to shul for. I have a bigger responsibility as a rabbi. At the same point, I think that Katrine's Yemenite history and there's a lot of Sephardic North African traditions, especially, that are very similar. A lot of oral history, that a lot of holidays that we've lost because the music has not been passed on after the Holocaust or through late modernity. And, we sometimes do change things at our own peril. The Lewandowski music that Katrine's talking about there, almost everyone on the face of this planet, even if they don't, let me rephrase that. Many Jews of synagogues, Sephardic, Ashkenaz, Orthodox, Reform, if you start singing Tzaddik Tamar Yifrach, you start with that, everyone's going to sing along. So there's some Lewandowskis that are like the Debbie Friedman one there. And I personally don't want to lead services that are nothing but Lewandowski, but at the same point, it's some of the greatest Jewish choral music ever written of the 19th century, and there's very few synagogues that are doing primarily Lewandowski. There's about 4 to 5 on the face of this planet that are primarily Lewandowski Nusach. What a loss for the world it will be when those stop doing that. And so I think that the final thing I want to say on this one is this conversation with BeitVirtuali and music is maybe just the very beginning. Because there's a lot to talk about and work out, and I don't know if people are having these conversations. I do know this: rabbis and cantors are scared, and we're taught to be scared. We are taught, you don't go in, you don't change anything, and the reason is because you'll have someone come up and say, the only reason I go to the shul is because of this melody, and then all of a sudden you have you step back into defensiveness, or you're butting heads earlier than you want to, and so we are taught to be very afraid in that one. Well, music is one of the tools we have for empowering and transforming. And if you ask people what's missing in their life, it's transforming to a higher state or a more healed state. And if that's one of my tools and I'm told I can't use it, then what do you want from me? So I think that this is a hard dialogue. It's a complicated dialogue. And the fact that, I mean, I wasn't expecting that would be most of what we talked about today. I'm glad we did. I know it was a controversial video. I've heard from other people, other than the comments I got. Keep on commenting on it. You know, we can have a little music corner every fourth podcast or something like that. I can do adult education or Zoom education on music if that's something you're interested in. You have to tell me if that's what you want, because otherwise I'm just kind of guessing what's in the atmosphere there. But yeah, I guess my final word on it is it's complicated and it's important, and none of us knows enough, and all of us should take responsibility on learning more. At the same time, we have sensitivity to how meaningful other people's musical traditions are to them that we might not be as comfortable with. Any final words? Any other things to bring up? I think we've hit that magical about hour into it.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to say a last word for Sukkot, or starting word for Sukkot, or something like this. I find Sukkot always a little
challenging because it's the end.
So
number one is Sukkot has become a synagogue tradition instead of a home tradition for many Jews around the world. It's not hard to build your own sukkah, so, and it's not too late. It can be done really quickly. One of my favorite stories ever was the first sukkah that the two of us built together. That's a story for a different day. That was a lot of fun, as we've got a copy of Maimonides' Mishnah Torah in one hand, and we're going through double checking that everything we're doing is halakhic, and then it blew away because we were on top of a building, and so that's a story for a different day there. But you know what? We have abrogated our ability to have home Sukkot ritual to the synagogue. Good for synagogues, for making sure the sukkahs are built and that people can be out there celebrating and have, at the same point, if you are in a living situation where you have a backyard and you are safe to do it, why aren't we doing it? It doesn't cost much. It's, so I think that's word number one. Word number two, I've got 2 videos coming out. They're already filmed, and so if you see something ever come up on Chag on YouTube, just be aware it's been preloaded and then it's scheduled to go live. So I'm not uploading stuff on Shabbos or on holiday. But one is a meta video on what I'm going to be doing for a while on the video part of BeitVirtuali, and then using that theme, I'm going to talk about Sukkot, and I'll probably release that closer to Shabbos or something like that, or maybe over the weekend, I'm not sure. So 2 videos coming up, but it's moving in a different direction of inquiry that hopefully will be interesting. But the little hint is Sukkot is our holiday of illusion. It's where we ask ourselves the questions of what do we think is permanent in our life that is actually ephemeral. And if the answer is, hey, tomorrow's going to be exactly like today, then we've set ourselves up for a lot of pain, because tomorrow is going to change. And if no one believes me, has anyone looked out the window and seen the pandemic recently? Nothing is the same as it was a couple years ago for any of us. And Sukkot is the holiday where we're supposed to rehearse that. And if none of us had the flexibility to make any changes, well, first of all, we had to change. So there's some flexibility, but we have a built-in holiday to meditate on these themes. So I'll be talking more about that in upcoming videos. We are going to be aiming for a service this Friday, BeitVirtuali Kabbalat Shabbat. We're going to be going, for right now, every other week. So Sunday podcast, then the Friday after that a service, and then 8 days after that another Sunday podcast. So you need to let us know what you want, and you need to know what is going to have you be a supporting part of BeitVirtuali. We need to know if you want more services, if it's more podcasts, more videos, if you're waiting for adult education. Right now we're really guessing. We're still very early in this process, but we want to hear from you on what it is that you're actually listening to or getting something out of, what's actually going to make a difference, because we actually have some ability to be flexible. And listen, if all you want to do is podcasts, then this is a lot of fun for me. Hopefully it's for you as well.
Yes.
Okay. As you're sitting closer to the double corn than I am. And yeah, in the meantime, thank you all for being a part of BeitVirtuali. If you want to become a supporter, we'll have the Patreon link down below sometime in the next 24 hours, and as well as anything else that we should link to that we've talked about today. We're grateful for you all, and you know what my catchphrase is at this point. lift at least one person up today. Don't tear anyone down. That act of lifting someone up begins to lift us all up. When we do that, that transforms the world. I was listening to Carolyn Mace this morning, and she reiterated a Buddhist point that was made, and that is the best thing that any of us can do for this world is to be the healthiest version of ourselves that we possibly can. It sounds like New Age mumbo jumbo until we realize how many people we tear down because we ourselves are incomplete. So let's work to ourselves be more complete. This is one of the ways to do it. We're in dialogue with big stuff with all of this. But we need to treat each other kinder, and we need to not make excuses when we're not treating each other kinder. We need to admit what it is that we're doing at that point. And slowly we do experience tikkun olam through our acts of loving kindness. And with that, I say thank you all for joining in, and we will see you next time. So we'll see you this Friday. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.